All right, again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abdul Al-Kibsi. I'm the Managing Director for Programs at SIPE, and boy, it has been a fantastic, fantastic day to be part of this. Our next session, like I told you, is where we get to the meat. And we're expecting some practical tools to map, identify, and track corrosive capital. And for that, we're lucky to have as a moderator, Bessie Chen. Bessie is a policy analyst working for Chairman Risch on the Senate Foreign Relations Republican staff covering Indo-Pacific issues. She was previously editor of the Jamestown Foundation's China Brief and has conducted research and analysis relating to China's malign influence, human rights, and foreign policy. She has a bachelor's degree in international relations and history from Johns Hopkins University, and is now, while doing all of this, pursuing a master's in technology policy at the Rand School of Public Policy. Bessie, all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here to moderate this panel. I think it sounds like we have heard a lot about the sort of theory of the case on best practices on how to counter Chinese coercive capital around the world, and now hopefully we will have a chance to hear from people working in the field on their lived real-world experiences on how to do this. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce the panelists and then open it up for brief opening remarks. Sitting right next to me is Zoran Nechev, who leads the Southern European portfolio at the Policy and Advocacy, and is the Policy and Advocacy Fellow at the Think Europe Institute. His research interests have focused on differentiated integration, EU enlargement policy, and the impact of coercive capital and external malign influence. In addition to many other titles, he is also an associate head of the EU department at the Institute for Democracy, a think tank that is based in North Macedonia. Sitting next to him is Oxales, who's Deputy Managing Director of Stratbase ADRi in the Philippines. He has 25 years of experience as a communications professional, working in the government and private sector, and he's an expert on strategic communications and advocacy. In addition to many other accomplishments, he is also one of the co-founders of the Character Building Foundation, Inc., which helped launch the Gawin and Tama movement to promote integrity, honesty, and hard work in Filipino society. Next to him is Tigran Jrbashyan, sorry if I killed that, who is a partner and director at the Ameria Management Advisory Services, one of Armenia's leading advisory firms. He's also previously served as the director for the Armenian European Policy and Legal Advice Center. He has a strong background in policy, public administration, and justice sector reforms, and over 25 years of experience working on initiatives that are focused on enhancing regulations to encourage good governance, economic growth, and supporting vulnerable groups, including the elderly. Finally, at the end, at the end of the list is Daniel Poveda Torres, who is the analysis coordinator at the Colombia Risk Analysis. He's a political scientist with degrees from the Universidad de los Andes and has experience in teaching, research, and digital storytelling. Some of his recent experience includes working as a scriptwriter for the Open Democracy web series on Latin American politics and co-hosting a podcast in Colombia on global affairs. So with that, I'm hoping to have this be a pretty open conversation, but Zoran, maybe I'll hand it over to you to talk about some recent work that you've done on PRC corrosive capital.
Okay, yeah, so we've done a lot of work on investment screening, trying to, the whole concept of investment screening to be put on the agenda of the, not only North Macedonia, but also, let's say, all the candidate countries for the European Union. So just to geographically locate where is North Macedonia, it's north from Greece. So it's part of Europe, but not part of the European Union. So with other 5 countries from the Western Balkans, plus Moldova and Ukraine, they're all and Turkey, they're all candidates for membership in the European Union. So we have heard a lot this morning and also yesterday, but this whole concept of investment screening sounds very technical, almost bureaucratic. So it deals with procedures, thresholds, regulatory frameworks, etc. But how I see it, beneath that, there is that technical layer lies something which is much more political, much more strategic in a sense. So the question is who gets to influence certain parts of the economies and the societies. So what is important for me, because the whole, when we discuss investment, is not always that we discussed about the economic growth of a certain country. Sometimes there are a lot of situations in which capital comes with certain strings attached. So some foreign investors are driven not only by profit, but also by political objectives, influence, or leverage. It was important to focus on this work because we have lived as a country, as a region, through cases where capital didn't just build jobs or infrastructure, but it also brought a lot of influence, dependencies, and in some cases, quite a significant political pressure. So that's what corrosive capital injection means. So without the screening process, these risks often go unnoticed until it is quite late, and then the consequences will come. So how I look at the investment screening, so I can name 3 components, and then I will give examples from the work that we have already done. So first is protecting sovereignty and security. So the screening mechanism helps government ask the right question before they open the door for certain investments. So who is behind this investment? What is the origin of the money? Does it strengthen or weaken our national security, critical structure, energy system, digital networks, etc.? So without screening, we risk selling strategic assets without even realizing the long-term consequences. As candidates for EU membership, but also members of NATO, this is of essential importance. The second element is level playing field with the EU. So for countries in the Western Balkans and across Europe, investment screening is also about aligning with EU standards and EU regulation. The EU has created its own framework for investment screening. Some countries had it way before, but on a European level, it has been promoted quite recently. And as one of the elements for us integrating in the EU is also integrating in the single market of the EU, we cannot afford to be the weak link and this kind of corrosive capital to enter through our doors. So from this perspective, screening mechanism is a tool of credibility, but also convergence with the EU. In our case, as we are candidates, the EU member states will be also one of the target countries that the investments which are coming to the country will be screened. It's quite, and I will give you a story. I think Jeff is here. Yeah. So recently, a couple of years ago, we have been on one of the first advocacy visits to Brussels. So there was a delegation from the country, and Jeff was hosting us. And we went on a meeting with DG Trade. So DG Trade is the main director general that deals with investment screening on the level of the European Union. So when we started discussing and express our willingness to have an investment screening in North Macedonia, but also to express the interest that other countries from the region wants to have this, we have asked if there is a possibility to gradually integrate these countries into the system before the actual accession. So first, the response was quite funny, that we were the first one. So there was only one. So we had one person was from the Macedonian Chamber of Commerce, and the other one was from the government, and it was Jeff and myself. So the response that we got from DG Trade, that we were the first people that came from all the candidate countries that are willing to have investment screening mechanism. And they haven't thought of this, so there is no kind of way how this can be done now. And as we asked for gradual integration, so to gradually integrate before actual accession, they said that it won't be possible, at least for the time being. So these countries won't be gradually integrated, but it will be bungee jumping once we become members of the European Union. So this was the answer that we got officially from DG Trade. So it was quite a funny situation. The third element is building resilience against influence of foreign operations. And here, for this, I will give you the personal example, how we started working in the institute, how we started actually working on investment screening. So we go way back with SIPE. We have started working on and detecting malign influence of China and Russia in the country. And after detecting it, after really detecting where the governance gaps that have been used to penetrate this such a corrosive capital, we said that it is right time to start working on resilience. I don't know who mentioned that, maybe it's not the right word, but kind of, trying to build a system, an instrument through which we can actually monitor where the investments are coming from. And that's how we started actually working. At that time, also, it was a novel instrument of the European Union, promoted on the level of the European Union. That's how we said, okay, anyways, we need to adopt this piece of legislation, so why not starting building these instruments even before the actual accession. In terms of how did we communicate it, I didn't thought of this myself. It was actually an opinion given by the vice president of our Chamber of Commerce that when we communicate the value of the investment screening, we can compare it with the security checkpoints at the airports. So everyone knows the process. You line up, you show the documents, your luggage goes through the scanner, and only if there is nothing suspicious, you're allowed to enter. So this is the analogy with the investments. This is how also we sell it to the political elites, to the businesses and everyone else in the country. So with the investment screening, we don't close the airport. So screening is just, shutting the door to investors in a way that for the ones which are not transparent, and we cannot track where the funds are coming from. However, most of the passengers, very similar to the airports, most of the passengers, around 99%, go through checkpoints without any problems. In reality, with the investments, it's going to be pretty much the same. So those that create jobs, innovation, and growth, they're all fine. But there is always this 1% of investments which will try to penetrate the country and the market. Proportional checks. So if you go through, checkpoint, that if there is something suspicious, they will put you on the side and check. Pretty much is the same. If you fall under the investments in a certain priority areas, then you will be checked thoroughly. If not, then you can pass through without any problems. There are no risk attached. The final element, how we try to sell the value of investment screening, is that same as in the airport example or analogy. Once you pass through security, everyone knows that they're safe because there are no instruments that can harm you. The very same goes with investment screening. Once the companies go through the system, then it is safe that this capital will operate in a market-based economy as it should be. So to conclude, when we talk about investment screening, we are not talking about this bureaucratic red tape. We're actually talking about something common sense as a strong security at the airport. So open to all who come in a good faith, but vigilant against those who bring risks into the system. I will stop there.
The airport screening analogy is a great one, and I think really helpful for having a direct metaphor for how investment screening should be applied. Can you share a little bit about, given that I know you've worked on sort of broader EU policy as well, some of the lessons learned that, like in the North Macedonian context, that you think are helpful as sort of the broader single market is thinking about integrating or sort of implementing their own frameworks?
Yeah, so any candidate country that wants to enter the European Union needs to, align with the EU acquis. So that's the body of legislation that the EU has. So sometimes it's regulation, sometimes directive, but in general, you need to align completely with what is the acquis communautaire. So all of our countries are, as we are officially candidates and we want to enter, that's our strategic priority, we need to align. Mm-hmm. So it's better to align with these policies which can also bring a lot of benefit to the country in the prior stages than actually waiting for the last stages to try to implement such a policy, because it's also familiarizing yourself and socializing with the instruments that are already there at the EU level. Mm-hmm. And this is, the meeting at DG Trace tells you that, we have our own, interest in being part of that system, because it's not just establishing the system. If you don't have the capacities, and we would not have the capacities, as many other countries outside the European Union that are candidates, but also countries which are part of the European Union do not have sufficient capacities to go through this, to work properly in the system. But this is something that we need to build in time, to build, to have more resources, to build the capacities that, once we become member of the European Union, then we can actually, implement sufficiently the policy, not being the weak link that through which, this kind of corrosive capital will enter. Not that, there is no corrosive capital entering through EU member states, far from that. But this is all process of learning. Previously, it was that it was not obligatory for all. Now it's an obligatory to be part of this system. So also the European Union is kind of learning through the process, and I think that in years' time we will find a way how we can actually communicate and be part of the system even prior to our EU accession, because most of these elements are very confidential. So that's why they don't give you access, because it's also it's also trust between the states and also the European Union and states which are outside.
Yeah, that anecdote you shared aside, it's great that you're being forward-looking about looking to the future, what will be needed in order to not be the weak link. But hopefully your engagements with Brussels have gotten better since then.
Yeah, and it's also that our economies. So on average in the Western Balkans, the trade, around 85% of the trade goes with the European Union. I will give you just the example with numbers on North Macedonia. 50% of our export goes to Germany. And so we are kind of hub for producing car parts for German automotive industry. So, if you collaborate anyways with it, why don't we have that system
Might
that
as well
can
build it in to begin with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moving on to Orly, I wanted to ask you, first of all, I know that Stratbase has had some really good success in developing coalitions and getting buy-in from various stakeholders. And so I wanted to ask you to share a little bit about the practices that you saw as being most effective when you do that. But also, I think you've had some good experiences both with the monitoring and the research and the information gathering side, but then also it would be great if you could share a little bit more about how you are able to build sort of strong advocacy networks and to build buy-in among various stakeholders in order to get to some of your policy goals.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you for this opportunity for us to be able to share how we are able to engage and change policy in the context of the Philippines and the environment that we are advocating in. First of all, you mentioned about monitoring and gathering the data. That is really foundational to every issue or advocacy that we engaged in. How we do it is that aside from our internal teams who monitor around 20 sectors actively on a daily basis, we also have networks in the academe, in the legal sector, and even in the technical sector. We monitor all of these things because the Philippines right now is really pushing itself and on the cusp of breaking through to become a developing country. And in so doing, of course, there are so many challenges, there are so many regulatory challenges and changes that for private sector, it tends to be a little bit volatile, and they ask us to give strategic advice on all of these regulatory changes, because as we know, when the regulatory atmosphere is volatile, it is not good for private sector or for any enterprise for that matter, or for the whole economy for that matter. So what we do is, like for advocacies that we've worked with SIPE, the first thing we do is we try to connect it with the people. We ask ourselves the question, how does this really impact us, the people? We ask that question because we learned through the years that that's also the first question that our media asks, our reporters ask. Because for them, the story is, okay, how is that going to be important to our audience, which is really the mass population of the country? And that is also important because all of them, all of the people of the Philippines, they're all constituents of both the policymakers, the private sectors, because they are the customers of the private sector and government. So that's how we approach it. We try to link it and really link it to some of our regular advocacies, such as good governance. Good governance, of course, has an effect on many consumers, because if a government does not function well, it affects all sorts of policies that results in, for example, in economics, inflation, higher prices of goods. And these have all a political effect on the political leadership. So what we do is we always go back to the foundation of research in terms of what the people want. We conduct regular researches or even surveys, national surveys, on what are the critical or most urgent needs of the people. And we always use that as guidance for all of our partners in terms of how should we actually craft the messaging so that this would be responsive. The operative word is responsive to all of these urgent needs of the people. So that's how we approach things. We gather data and we link it directly on how it will affect the stakeholders relevant to an issue. And the research is one part, as I said, but the more important part is with that research, when we have crafted the messaging, is to who do we directly engage with. So for government, of course, in Congress, there are various committees that are in charge of all of these issues. And through the years, we saw that it is critical to have a solid network in both houses of Congress. In the Philippines, we have a Senate and a Congress, a bicameral form of government. And through the years, we found it very important to harness our networks within these houses of Congress to be able to, number one, sort of recruit champions, possible champions for possible policy reform. Number two, we get guidance in terms of what their priorities are. Priorities in terms of what their legislative initiative would be, for example, for this new Congress, because that gives us guidance on whether there are risks or there are opportunities for the private sector. Another sector that we seriously engage is, of course, the civil society. Civil society, we mean, is not just all the NGOs or advocacy groups, but also the advocacy groups of the private sector, the business groups, and also an important factor is the international community. I think if you know Stratbase, we are the prime movers of the country's issue with regards to the West Philippine Sea. That's why Stratbase ADRi, which is Albert Del Rosario, our former chairman, the late Ambassador Albert Del Rosario, who was actually the main champion of the arbitral victory against China, wherein we actually nullified their 9-dash line, which is still a raging issue and ongoing. And this is, I mentioned that advocacy because this is just one of so many advocacies that we have actually initiated. That's number one, when we do these advocacies and communicate it and engage our stakeholders, we always make sure that we have the right facts, scientific facts, nonpartisan facts, because when we use that facts, especially with policymakers, they can't really debate about it. They'll have to disprove it. But whenever we come up with all of these facts and present all of these papers, research papers, it doesn't stop there. We use these research papers actually as impetus for forums, dialogues, articles. Stratbase, for its part, we are published every week in the 4 major national broadsheets of the country. I, for one, I'm a columnist in Manila Standard. Our president is with the Philippine Daily Inquirer and Business World, and our other colleagues write in the Philippine Star, 4 of the top broadsheets. And we use this network in mainstream media to actually be amplified in social media, which is, again, another aspect of the communication, strategic communications part. Because I think all of us have smartphones, and several surveys have really revealed that people, at least in the Philippines, the one source of information is no longer TV, no longer radio. It's our cell phone. It's our mobile phones. It's social media, actually. It's through social media that they check the news. It's either they check the news or what their friends pass on to them as news. Okay. But that's the reality. And that is actually an initiative that we actually went into and really seriously got into during the pandemic, because all of us were forced to go online. And during the pandemic, it was a challenge, but we saw it as an opportunity to sharpen our skills in using this media. So this is the kind of ecosystem or method or process that we use whenever we do initiate some advocacies, especially with SITE. And we found it very effective. And that, in a combination, as you will see, is actually a campaign. We approach it as almost like a political campaign, because we may have a great paper, we may have the best data, but if nobody knows about it and nobody acts on it, it remains a piece of paper. And we feel that that is the real objective of our advocacy. It's really to be able to convert, to act, to recruit people to act with us, so that the regulatory reforms that we want will actually happen.
Okay. I really appreciate your line that you need the research and the facts to drive engagement. It seems like such a simple concept, but done well, one that can be so powerful. I definitely want to ask more questions about how you are able to sort of navigate competing interests. I think when talking to policymakers, that can be such a, especially when you're looking at reforming a telecommunication sector where there's so many vested interests already, being able to actually drive action with advocacy is so important. So I hope we can dig into that a little bit more, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to Tigran and just ask a little bit, given your experience in Armenia on developing an investment law, I wanted to ask your thoughts on the role that private sector can play in being an effective stakeholder to address illicit financial flows and coercive capital and advocate for reforms. Sometimes there can be challenges in working with private sector, but where are the opportunities to do so and to create an environment that is attractive for new investment?
Thank you. Thank you, and first of all, it's a great honor and pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel. Such a professional specialist in the area, and it's a really great opportunity to talk about that. In order to answer to your question, I would like to start from the point, which is probably will echoing some ideas which was presented in the last panel by Nishan and our colleague from Kenya, and try to understand what is the interesting points related with this credit risk and why the credit risk ratings agencies sometimes not able to see the real problem behind. This is something is very, very interesting because generally speaking, any investment is based on a very simple formula, risk reward. This is the investment origin, nature of that. The problem then when we are facing the corrosive and constructive investments, we are facing a real problem of understanding where is the risk and where is the reward in different places. And we are comparing the two things which is not comparable. Because generally speaking, the risk of the corrosive investment is the following. It's opposite to the risk of associated with constructive investment, because based on building up the proper institutions, building up of the rule of the law, this will increase the risk in one case and will decrease the risk for another case. And this is the opposite risks in reality. About the award, it's also very interesting because the award, in case of constructive investment, it's a profit. It's an interest rate. In case of the corrosive investments, it's not a direct interest rate. It's a long-term impact on the decision-making of these governments, long-term opportunity to extract the additional premium from the country. And as a result of that, these two phenomena cannot be compared with each other. And this is create a problem. And in order to address this problem, I think the approach which we used in the building up the project and building up this idea of investment screening and corrosive capital assessment is based on a following approach. Of course, there is a huge work to be done in building up the proper institutions in all our countries. Let's agree that this is a way of changing the balance between the risks associated. When you are coming to the award, the issue is that if you are not able to create additional cost for corrosive investments, you are leaving the constructive investments to compete with the corrosive investments when it's obviously they will lose. And generally speaking, whatever you are doing now, the first beneficiaries and stakeholder is a constructive private sector. Because constructive private sector, otherwise you will leave in a position when they will compete with the corrosive businesses, and definitely they will lose with corrosive businesses. They are not ready to pay so much interest or to pay so low price as it is done by the corrosive interest. That's why the major stakeholder in the process of reforms is a private business. Private business who is driven by the modern standards of the corporate governance, modern standards of the transparency, modern standards of accountability. They have a direct interest to become a competitive with a not comparable area of the businesses. This is the first. The second is, of course, the other stakeholders of the process, because generally speaking, One of the big problems that society is sometimes not able to realize the long-term reward which the corrosive investors are looking for. Because in a short term, it looks like okay, and as it was mentioned today many times, what to do for a government who is facing the situation where there is no any single constructive investors appearing to invest in this public infrastructure, and where is only the corrosive investors there, how to behave. In this case, the problem that corrosive investors will have a much more longer and much more non-monetary impact and will collect his interest over the time. And the constructive investor is not able to adhere or reach the level of the interest rate which is provided by the corrosive investors. That's why I think that one of the major area stakeholders which have to be supportive on that, it's of course the public media. Because they are creating, they are educating, they are providing the information flow to the society, explaining in reality what's going on. Explaining that, looks guys, this road which was constructed, it looks like today you will benefit it from this road, but at the same time your generations will pay for that road for many times more than it was assumed to be done. I think this stakeholder analysis and proper mapping allowed us in Armenia to build up in our opinion and in opinion of the government, very strong coalition of the partners able to promote and drive and motivate of development this reform. And this is ending up with a very real situation, because in comparison with North Macedonia, we don't have this European carrot in front of us, that European requirements demand from the regulation. We need to find some other motivation to drive this force. And I think this is a very important to be able to build up this process based on a real interest of the different groups and to reach the results. I think this reform approach probably looks very interesting. And another idea which that just a couple of days and two years ago came to our mind, that in order to be able to make the proper analysis, especially in the investment screening, you need to clearly identify the critical sectors, because this is not also easy. Sometimes it looks like public utility is only critical cities, but for example, data access today or the technology access is even worse, even more critical today than just the mineral or the public utility. That's why I think this identification of these areas, this is the first, and second of the capacity building, because we have to admit that we don't have this level of the capacities within the public sector to be able to implement this investment screening in an appropriate way. And probably I will stop here. I will be happy to answer your questions or the questions from the participants, and that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I know we have one more presenter, and then, so maybe we will finish that up and then open it up to questions from the room. But Daniel, moving on to you, I think the research that you have done is very fascinating as it looks at sort of regional comparisons of corrosive capital examples between Venezuela and Colombia. So can you speak to some of the challenges that you have faced in conducting your research and trying to determine what investments are corrosive capital and what is maybe permissible? What methods and indicators did you use as you were going about that methodology?
Thank you, Bessie, for the introduction and the question. I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm dressed up exactly as I was dressed up in that photo. I should have mixed it up a little bit for this special occasion. But thank you, Bessie and SIPE, for recognizing the value of the work we've done with Colombia Risk Analysis on corrosive capital, a project that's still in its early stages. At least in identifying cases of corrosive capital in Colombia. We've already published one case study, which is what I wanted to talk about today. And it's an honor to join Zoran, Orlando, and Tigran on this panel to discuss the tools that we've used in each one of our countries to map and identify corrosive capital. Now, as many of the colleagues that we've been having these very interesting conversations over the past few days already know, because I've been repetitive on that topic, our work in Colombia is one of the very few, if not only, cases of corrosive capital, of regional corrosive capital outside of Asia. So this brings me to mention a little bit that first challenge that we had, that we faced alongside CIPE and the CIPE office in Colombia, which was actually identifying the case of corrosive capital in our country. And as you already know, Colombia has long time historically been the US's closest ally in the region. Its foreign policy, even under the Petro administration, remains very tied to Washington. And the US continues to be Colombia's main trade partner. So this kind of relationship with the US has, at least in my opinion, limited closer ties with other countries such as China, Iran, Russia, etc. The exception, I do have to be honest, has been China, which has very steadily expanded investments in Colombia, in infrastructure, technology, and mining, and has now become Colombia's second largest trading partner behind the US. Now, the thing about Chinese investment in Colombia is the fact that even in flagship projects, as Ángela Vélez had mentioned before yesterday, as the Bogotá Metro, well, China has, in a very wide regard, followed the rules. The Bogotá Metro is currently being built by a Chinese operator. But I do believe that this is because of Colombia's strong procurement standards and oversights of both local and international financing, financial institutions, right? So that made us, with CIPE and Colombia Risk Analysis, to actually say, well, where is corrosive capital coming from? Especially because our relationship with China is still very underdeveloped compared to other countries in the region. And that's when we found the case of Monomeros, which is a Colombian fertilizer company that's based in the Colombian city of Barranquilla, which Becky actually mentioned in the panel before us. Now, this all came to our attention because when we were starting and identifying these cases of corrosive capital, potential cases of corrosive capital in Colombia, the Petro administration was interested in buying back Monomeros, which the Colombian government had sold off to the Chavez administration back then in 2006. And then in 2023, with the current administration, we found out that it was interested in buying it back to be able to have a little bit more control on fertilizer costs and be able to protect the agricultural sector in Colombia, right? And the fact that Monomeros currently supplies around 30% of fertilizers being used in Colombia, well, this, we notice, opened a big vulnerability and risks for that sector in Colombia, being in the hands of an increasingly authoritarian regime under the Maduro government in Venezuela, right? Which is now, our food security is now dependent of a heavily sanctioned regime by many Western countries. So then when we were digging into those opaque company transactions and the fact that the Colombian government was interested in buying Monomeros back, we noticed that it was going to be a very difficult challenge as long as the Maduro government was to remain involved. And this is obviously even more so true when you notice that many of the decision makers on the board of Monomeros are heavily linked to other state-affiliated companies in Venezuela, such as PDVSA, its major oil company, which some have faced corruption allegations or have engaged allegedly in corruption practices. And also on the Colombian side, when former Monomeros board members, where we had a representation a couple of years ago, but we don't have that anymore, have been heavily linked to the campaign, the presidential campaign, and also to high-level Colombian officials. So you can imagine that when we looked into this topic, not a lot of people wanted to talk to us at the beginning. And that's what happens when you dig into sensitive subjects, and especially when you're trying to figure out how these kind of companies actually work. And what we did is, it's a very qualitative report, and what we did is obviously we tried to talk to experts, academics, former government officials, also present government officials. But something that I think was a bit innovative was that Colombia Risk Analysis with SIPE, we actually had access to and to original investigative work that was carried out by a local journalist there in Colombia. We aren't journalists, we're a consultancy firm, but then with that original work, we were able to have access to very high-level decision makers in Monomeros, and to be able to actually know what were the intentions behind the sell-off of the company at that time. Also, we carried out closed-door panels with SIPE as well to be able to gather recommendations on, and also their perspectives on the risks of having such an important company as Monomeros being in the hands of the Venezuelan regime, right? And then we did this other thing that I also think might be useful for other SIPE partners around the world that are going to dig into similar cases in their home countries, is that we also partnered up with a local legal organization that reviewed our work and ensured that we were safe from any kind of potential legal threats or retaliation, since we were actually tackling on such sensitive subjects. And I just want to say that we believe that maybe other partners in the region and well, at least in the region, because I know this operates very similarly in other countries in Latin America, but all around the world might actually find this useful to have similar safeguards for their work. So mainly when their work might be able to unsettle powerful actors such as we were doing. And I'm also very happy to hear, and this is why spaces like these, yesterday we could talk to other regional partners to know that my Ecuadorian colleague had also published a work on how journalists could actually cover these topics, and see that there are other tools in the region that we can share and use to be able to promote our work on corrosive capital. So that was, and I'll leave it there for like this first intervention, but that's the way that we tackle that. And as for the indicators, which I skipped on a little bit, is the fact that there are four, and I'll go over these very briefly, but the first one was the lack of transparency and accountability. And this is why I'm very happy to see that Tigran and Orlando mentioned media involvement in their research and in their work, because actually it was local Colombian journalists that noticed and reported on transfers from Monomeros to parent companies that were heavily linked to the Maduro regime, allegedly financing and funneling funds from a company that was working in Colombia to finance the Maduro government. The second one, and this is all criteria that was inspired by SIPE guidelines and other projects around the world, was the fact that we identified very direct adverse impacts on local businesses. The fact that there was a potential risk of price hikes, as well as potential supply chain disruptions if anything were to happen in the neighboring country. Well, that was a very big risk that could affect Colombian farmers and agricultural workers. Finally, these contracts involve actors who have been engaged allegedly with corrupt practices, as well as obviously working for sanctioned regime, which makes it much more difficult, obviously, to engage, or for other private buyers or even public buyers from the Colombian side to buy off. And finally, what we believe is that the case contributed to democratic backsliding, since the influence of such a strategic sector, which Tigran also mentioned as well, and everyone here has mentioned, being in the hands of this foreign entity or having a 30% influence in the sector in Colombia obviously raised a red flag and alarms for us. So these are kind of like the indicators we tried to follow to actually go through with our research. And I hope these are tools that could be useful for other countries and partners, as well as my colleagues here on the panel.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to abuse my moderator privileges to ask the first question, but then after that I promised to open it up. I think we've heard a lot in very different country contexts about sort of the need to not only develop good data and have sort of fact-based analysis, but then to be able to use media campaigns and then leverage, work with a bunch of different stakeholders to be able to sort of push broader awareness both of the problem of corrosive capital and the solution. I am curious, given that oftentimes, you know, Chinese actors can be lesser known in particular countries, maybe less in the Philippines, which is a little bit closer, but you know, in North Macedonia, Armenia, Colombia, a lot of times my sense has been you talk about the problem of China and they see it as somebody else's problem. So I'd be curious if, you know, anybody, please feel free to answer this, but if you could talk about how you overcome that challenge of trying to raise awareness about a problem that can oftentimes have quite long-term or abstract risks associated with it. How do you get that buy-in if people aren't already sort of on your side?
I'd be happy to.
You go first, I can go second.
So I go first? All right, sorry. I'm taking way too much of the time.
don't go with.
But this is interesting, and I think the Colombian case is interesting for that question as well. As I said at the beginning, we have, comparatively with the region, an underdeveloped relationship with China. But that was when we were actually trying to track cases of corrosive capital about a year and a half ago. Now, circumstances have changed. And this is something that I wanted to, this is that kind of like some of the lessons learned from our work is the fact that corrosive capital can look very different depending on the context, but then it can evolve as well. And we do have to come up with tools that adapt to that, that evolution of how corrosive capital might look like. And so I don't have the tools right now to say, well, how do we raise awareness on this? Because we haven't been able to tackle the issue. But something that worries me at this time is the fact that obviously before, at that time, we had the example of the Bogota Metro, but now our ties during this first semester of 2025 have become much closer with China. And Colombia in May 2025 signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. The Petro administration has also mentioned numerous times of its intentions of joining BRICS in the near future, though we haven't seen anything progress on that front still. But these are all plans within the administration's desire to diversify Colombia's foreign alliances. So that means that the context is going to change very, very rapidly in the incoming months. And I do think that the work that we do is valuable as in it can be preventive. And by mapping corrosive capital early and not making the same mistake that we did, that we're now studying a case that actually started out in 2006, almost 20 years ago, we can be able to start projects like these even if the relationship with China is incipient, and to also, well, work on making sure that the rules on public works and public tenders are transparent, competitive, so that, as I said with the Bogota Metro example, any kind of participation from China or other countries of the world who would like to develop infrastructure or tech, et cetera, in Colombia will have to abide and play by the rules. And the fact that, I mean, I wish that these tools help us in diagnose the problem, but also to be able to build strong institutions that let us benefit from investment wherever they may come without sacrificing any level of transparency, and, as we saw in the Monomeros case, not sacrifice sovereignty over market or economic decisions for a country like mine. So what I'm trying to say is that the future will bring us much, much more work on the subject, and we have to be prepared.
I would like to continue exactly from the point when Daniel finished, because the corrosive capital is evolving. We have to realize that the world is not standing on the same position, and the world, which includes also the sources of the corrosive capital as well. They are trying to change their nature, trying to change their ways and the targets in accordance with the developments of remaining part of the world. And this is something which is sometimes is missing. This is what yesterday I tried to say about the technological disruption. Because generally speaking, I think that tomorrow there is no need to invest in the public utility. And there is much more interesting place how to control the situation and to get the benefit that investing in data sets, in data access in the country, instead of investing billions of dollars into the building up the bridges and roads. You could invest much nominal amount compared with that just to access, for example, the data sets related with the medical personal data, and you will control the society completely. I think this is something which we have to realize. This is the first point. The second point, that how to address this problem. The first of all, to make the proper diagnostics in identifying the critical areas, which is, I think, is probably one of the problematic places, because when you see that we met here with the many countries, 35, 40 countries presented here, there is common understanding that, okay, public utilities, critical minerals, it's something is very important. But if we are trying to say about what about the technologies, which particular technologies is risky, what about the data sets, what about, this is becoming already vulnerable. I think we need to have the clear understanding where it is. The second, we need to understand what is the rules of the game. The rules of the game also is changing. Because generally speaking, in order to achieve the results, you need to create a transparent mechanism. You need to create the proper accountability. You need to create the institute of the ultimate beneficiary. You have to, there is a lot of elements which have to be done in order to build up a proper system which will protect and will protect the constructive capital towards the corrosive capital. Because generally speaking, we have to admit, in the current situation, without the interference, without the work to be done, the corrosive capital will win. They have a much more attractive, they have able to pay more interest to the government, bureaucrats, let's say. And this is something which we have to agree. Another point, that in long term, they have the completely destroying the economies, completely destroying the prosperity of the society, completely destroying the sovereignty of the countries and the security. But in the short term, they looks like very attractive. And this is where the organizations like SIPE as a great work to be done. And that's why I think that we have to always refer, and this was an amazing speech today of the representative of the net, chairman of the net, because it was really emotionally presenting the real threat, the real problem. And this is something which we have to agree, all of us. Thank you.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Okay, yeah. Again, I will base the answer on our own example. So how we managed to, because when we started working with SIPE on this issue, there wasn't much talk in the country about it. Even the government didn't have it on radar, that we need to build kind of a system that will screen investment. How we did it, and it's a really interesting story. So we have started, and this was somehow also managed or facilitated by SIPE, to take all the stakeholders, at least the most important stakeholders, on board since the beginning. So not to approach only the government, but also to put businesses within that working group that will deal with the whole constructive capital and investment screening. So since the beginning, we had the three biggest economic chamber in the country. So we had the national one, we had the MCHEM, and we have the German economic chamber on board since the beginning. And through that, we penetrated all the other businesses that they are members, the companies that are members of these chambers. Besides them, we had also people from the government and also civil society organization that were also looking at elements like integrity, transparency, etc. So since the beginning, we kind of nurtured this atmosphere, and that each member of the society has its own interest into promoting this kind of policies. In time, even we, when we started, we were skeptical that this will work. But obviously it has worked. We have built kind of, trust among the partners that we need something like this and that we should promote a policy. When we started actually working, we were told that also the investment screening mechanism is also part of this. We have kind of a strategic dialogue between US and North Macedonia. This strategic dialogue, when we started actually working, the US Embassy in Skopje told us that they have already tried a year ago, and they already went on a tour to see all the ministers. And because it's the US ambassador, of course, everyone responded, yeah, fine, we will do it, but nothing has been done. And they said, as you have started this work, us without knowing that they have done it already, they provided a complete support on our work. So, you can also realize, what are the limits of, the US in other countries and how important is actually the think tanks, the civil society, this kind of public-private approach of putting, forward certain policies. And one thing that Tigran mentioned about, the ones which are promoting constructive and the other one, corrosive capital, what we have seen is that in time, as they understood that we will have this instrument, the guys that we know them, from previously kind of, facilitating this kind of corrosive capital entering the country, the only interest on the closed meetings with them was that if the law will be retroactive. So if their capital, which already
this
went
is the major
through,
question.
Yeah, so
Fully agree.
if the capital that already entered the country is safe, if their capital is safe, then we are okay with it because we will not have, even more competitors with, this kind of corrosive capital entering the country. So somehow during the process they switched from the ones which are opposite, the ones which are kind of interested in having this because, their money is safe because this would not tackle their businesses.
Sorry, may I just remark? Because I think we are facing a real problem because their corrosiveness is not disappeared. Their corrosiveness is there. The problem that they not have the competitor in form of the other corrosiveness. This is the problem, but the corrosiveness is still with them. They will create the problem. They will try to utilize their rights and monopoly positions in the economy because of their real origin. And I think one of the issues, and I don't have answer to that, but I think we need to think about that. What about the retrospective approach? How to deal with the investments is already in the country. Because this is a question mark, I don't know. We are now learning how to deal with the investments which has to come to the country yet. And we know how to deal with that. But how to deal with the investment is already in the country. This is a real yet to come. I don't know answer.
Those are different policies. Retroactively it will be extremely difficult, impossible. Although it was promoted in one of the candidate countries. In Moldova, you had kind of a system which it had the opportunity
it can have a negative effect as well, by the way.
But just to say that, in our case, it will be extremely difficult, almost impossible. But, investment screening is not a silver bullet that, will, kind of create the perfect business environment.
Agree.
Interesting.
I know we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. I think over here, sir, I saw you go up first. Somebody's coming around with a microphone. Sorry.
So, thanks a lot. I really like both the earlier panel and this one because it touches upon, I think, a really important thing when it comes to both unlocking constructive capital and defending against corrosive capital, in the sense that I'm hearing a certain acknowledgement of some economic sectors being more important than others. So when we think of strategic technology, critical infrastructure, certain critical inputs like raw materials, critical minerals, energy inputs, digital infrastructure, these are just sectors that are more important than certain others. So they come with multiplier effects for the whole economy. They also come with lock-in effects. So if you lock your digital infrastructure into a certain provider of it, you will be there for a whole long time. It's difficult to get rid of it then afterwards. So I think this gives us a pragmatic approach to deal with both constructive capital and corrosive capital. We need to focus our efforts on these strategic sectors. We won't be able to prevent corrosive capital all over the board, but we need to prevent corrosive capital in these sectors because these are so important. So I think when we think about instruments and our approach to both unlocking and defending, we need to focus our efforts here in these certain sectors and create those instruments for these sectors.
Just quick to end, or you want to continue? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask for maybe one other question, and then we can just do responses to both. I think over here was the next one that I saw.
Yeah, good afternoon. Johannes Sasefa from Stalwart Advisors. Yeah, again, great day, great conversations, and the last panel and this panel, thought-provoking. I wanted to ask the same question earlier, and I think it relates to the same panel as well. My experience is mostly around Africa. I work on corrosive capital. We've done work in Ethiopia, Angola, DRC, and Kenya. The question from all this, the work we've done that keeps coming to my mind is, if we had transparency, if we have strong democratic institutions, if we have governance, can we avoid corrosive capital? There's another thought along that discussion. Capital has a marketplace. Corrosive, constructive, they both compete in that marketplace. So in our experience in Africa, the corrosive capital has won because constructive capital is not present. And the market, the way the market prices, right, is the way it draws the type of capital. I can't believe any country wanting just corrosive capital. If there was the perfect world, an abundance capital, in Africa, for example, for the infrastructure projects, pre-colonial infrastructure was really developed to supply colonial interests. Railways were built from mines to the port, roads were built from, to this day, inter-Africa trade is less than 20% because there's no road connection between countries, right? So there's a lot of demand for infrastructure development. The way these countries try to fill that demand is by looking for capital. And the capital that keeps showing up is not always the capital they want. So how do we deal with this issue? I know I threw a number of things. I struggled with this issue, so hopefully you can shed some light. Thank you.
Okay. Zoran, I know you had an answer to the critical sectors question, and then maybe we can move to you, Tigran.
Yeah, so, well, at least in our case, the critical sector first, because of the alignment, we have to follow the regulation. That's the first instance. But then, we're trying to adapt to the realities on the ground and also add additional critical sectors that we are looking at. And if we have issues with that, there is always our, transatlantic partners We also have the European Union can already, kind of assist us and even push us when we don't have enough courage or, let's say, the political will to do certain things. And I will give you just one example. The 4G equipment in my country was completely Huawei and ZTE, the infrastructure. Although there was a commitment, at least for 5G, to kind of transition, there wasn't really political will until there was a genuine push from the US. And it was one trip of I think, Undersecretary for Economy. First he landed in Skopje and then he went to Sofia, and we signed the Clean Network Initiative. And although more expensive for our citizens, which we didn't know actually, or the politicians didn't know how to capitalize on that. We, as a country, although Deutsche Telekom is the main operator, we need to invest quite a large sum of money to buy 5G equipment from Sony Ericsson, because but at that point in time we went with Sony Ericsson. So when we actually compare the 5G equipment that was promoted by Huawei and the one, Huawei was 3 times cheaper than Sony Ericsson. But, sometimes you put, the national interest in front of and, kind of more long-term thinking. And just to touch upon part of the question that the gentleman asked, regardless of all the standards and the integrity and the transparency, if there is a political will by the top of the country to kind of deal also with, corrosive capital and to enter the country, it's extremely difficult to prevent it. Although that does not mean that you cannot fight it. It will create additional burdens because they're signing contracts. At least in our case, when we were one of the first countries that took a credit as part of the BRI to build 2 highways. They dealt directly with the prime minister and 2 ministers. They didn't ask anyone. So once they signed the agreements, it was extremely difficult because all the penalties that we had to pay in order to withdraw from that kind of a contract. So, but we learned through the process, and it's important to learn and also kind of try to detect the opportunities that may arouse in order to have this kind of corrosive capital entering the country. That's maybe more important than actually, because if you have a prime minister or a minister, that president of the country that really wants to get a lot of money out of a corruptive deal, it's extremely difficult to prevent it. But then, all the other elements of the society can actually work in order to, kind of put that out there in the public and make it extremely difficult for them.
Tigran, please forgive me. I think I am being told that we are at time.
Okay.
So we will have to close this.
Okay.
But I think we've heard, there's a lot of work that has been done, and it sounds like there is a lot of work that remains to be done, including addressing thorny questions as to, looking forward to what the potential end states of all this work is going to look like. If there is room in the world for corrosive capital that is constrained by transparency and strong regulations. I know there's been a lot of conversation about this over the last couple of days, and I'm sure there will continue to be conversations. So we'd just like to thank all my panelists here for the really robust and interesting discussions, and then also SIPE for sponsoring this event. And with that, I will close it out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Bessie. Thank you for all of you for a fantastic panel. Please stick around. They're going to take a quick photo, then we have the closing remarks. So who's going to take the photo now? Please, quick one, and then we would continue.